Hey, what is going on, guys? Today we're going to be taking a look here at the HG Tri-Burning Gundam. Now, of course, I've already done a review and everything on this. This is going to be a work in progress video because I'm going to be repainting this kit for a custom commission. Now, what I wanted to start with this kit with you guys is just starting off with how to disassemble the kit, because something that I get asked about fairly often is how do you disassemble a kit for painting, or do you bother building a kit before you paint it, or some other variation about that. So I just wanted to share this with you guys so you can see this just once again for anyone who's maybe never seen me do this in a previous video before. But yes, what I normally do is to build the kit in full first and then disassemble it for painting. And so for a number of reasons, basically the main reason is just that helps you to get a feel for the kit, to just kind of understand how the parts fit together, and that will help you with the painting process, I think. So basically, what I need to do with this kit is just disassemble it now, and there are a couple of seam lines on here that we are going to have to get rid of, so we'll go over how to remove those. But for the most part, it's a pretty light kit when it comes to the seam lines on it. There's just a couple of little ones. The clear parts we'll also have to be a little bit careful of. Of course, I'm not going to be repainting those, I don't think, although for now we just can start by disassembling the things. So also, people are sometimes concerned when disassembling the kit is that they maybe will lose the parts, or they'll forget like which part's which. Like, for example, this part came off, or like if you take, this is the part off the side of the skirt there. If you have both of these parts off the side of the skirt and you can't remember, oh, which one is for the left and which one's for the right, if you get them mixed up, well, you can pretty easily figure it out by when you're trying to put the part back on there. And if it doesn't fit, then it's probably not the right one, right? So I think that's also something people get a little bit too worked up about sometimes, that it doesn't really need to be too much of an issue. So I can basically just start separating this out now. Like, for example, if I was gonna paint this in a customs color scheme where I was like changing, for example, all the white parts to gray and then all the red parts to blue, I would just separate them like so. My white parts here, my blue parts here, like that, just separate them out like that. But this one I'm doing, the color scheme is going to be a little bit different. So basically I just can separate these all just out by their color for the time being. Like, so I know, for example, like the hand and joint parts, all those parts that are kind of representing like the frame of the Gundam, even though this is an HG, obviously doesn't have a full frame, but all those type of parts that are going to be gray are still going to be basically gray for the main kit. So just disassembling the parts and just organizing them by how I'm going to paint them, just by color. Even that doesn't really necessarily matter all that much at this point, because when I go to wash the parts, they're all just going to get mixed up again anyway. But it just helps me get an idea of the different parts and everything. And I'm going to have to go in and do some sanding on the parts, just because the kit is all built up, but like the nub removal and everything on it wasn't like really perfect, and I just want to sand some of the parts on there as well. So it's just a matter of breaking the kit down for now, and then we'll identify areas that need some more work, like the seam line removal. Alright, so for the most part, here's everything separated out: the clear blue, white, dark blue, the red and yellow parts, the gray parts with the addition of this little blue part here on the front to there for the crotch. I'm not sure if I'll keep that in the same color as the other ones or not. Anyway, the color scheme is not totally decided yet, but what I wanted to show you guys first, here are just the problem parts, or the parts that will need some special consideration, these parts here. And the first of which is just the feet, not because there's a seam line on here, but just because these parts are a little bit trickier to take apart. Now, I think the reason why a lot of people ask about disassembling kits before painting is because they're worried about, in the disassembling process, about breaking something, and these parts are particularly difficult to take apart just because of the way that they fit. And it's very likely that I'll end up breaking a peg when trying to safely dislodge these parts without damaging them too much. So like, I could go in and like try to pry this more with my knife or something, or with some different tool. I do have a part separator, but in this case it's not really going to be all that useful just because of the way these parts fit together. So if it's between like trying to pry this up and then ending up damaging this area here, and then I have to go back and fix that, it's much more preferable to actually just break the peg if you have to, because on these parts there's always more than just the one peg. So even if you break one, there's still others that will be totally fine as long as you've got one. Even you don't even necessarily need even one peg between the two parts. You can always just glue them. It's not really that big of a problem if you break any pegs. And it's just another thing that you just have to not really worry too much about, because it happens, and sometimes it's just going to happen. And so There we go. So I was able to get them apart without breaking anything, but as you can see, like if this front peg on there would have broke, it still has these two back pegs to hold the part in place. It wouldn't have been necessary really at all. So well and good on that foot. Now, alright, so our tricky areas here on the leg, we're going to have a little bit of an exposed panel line here on the front that we're going to need to get rid of, and then on the back down here and up here as well. Now fortunately, this kit is designed in a way that the joints can be removed easily and you don't need to worry about that. On a lot of HG kits though, one of the things with seam lines, the problem is that you have to deal with the joints being locked in place if you remove the seam line. Fortunately for this kit, that's not a problem. And the same thing here on the forearm. We've got a little bit of a seam we're going to have to get rid of here at the front of the forearm, at the back of the forearm again, up there and down here. So it's basically just like with the lower leg. And this one also, fortunately, you can remove the joint there easily without having to worry about that. So just removing those seam lines should be easy. The third one we need to worry about here is on the shoulder. Now it's just a little bit of a seam here at the end of the shoulder. So this one will be pretty easy to just like do some edge scribe on that, just to turn that into a panel line or something on the top of the shoulder, easy enough. And because you can lock that polycap in there, that's not a problem, but locking this clear piece in there, you might not want to do that. That said, that is really only there for plugging on this other clear piece onto there. So I think it doesn't really necessarily matter that much if that part stays clear or not. So what I'll probably do is I'll just remove that seam line and just keep this all together, and that part won't be clear anymore. Not a big deal, because this clear part's going to go over the top of that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So all we gotta do is, some people will take the parts completely apart and then lay the glue on them and then put them back together. For something like this, you just need to split the part a little bit just so that you can get some space in between. Just drop your thin cement in there, press it together, and then wait. That's all there is to it. So that'll take, I like to give it plenty of time, so I'll probably give that a good at least 12 hours before I sand that. You could probably sand it a little bit earlier than that. And you could definitely wait longer if you wanted to, but I'm hoping that this will be ready to work on some more tomorrow for me. So that should be good. It's just a matter of just putting a little glue in there. Here on the forearm, it is a little bit more of a problem because pressing these parts together, you'll see that they just automatically pop back apart a little bit there, and that is because of that polycap in there. Now, fortunately, the polycap doesn't really need to stay in there, so I can actually just pop that out as well. And then once this is all seamed up, once the seam lines are removed or whatever, if the polycap is a little bit tight, doesn't quite fit in there or something like that, I can always trim the polycap a little bit. That's much easier, and then just pop it in there later on, rather than like, I guess I could do it now, just try to trim the polycap a little bit now until it fits well, and then just lock the polycap in there with the seam, but it's just not really necessary to do at this moment. So little glue here, a little glue there, and a little glue up there. So while those 6 parts need a little bit of time to let the glue cure on those, the rest of the parts I can get to sanding and prepping those. So let's take a look at some of these parts that are going to need a little bit of work. So for a lot of my sanding, once again, I like to use these wave sanding sticks. Now this one's pretty worn down, that's okay. I can still use it for a little while, at least for as long as I'm not sanding anything too major. And these are originally 600 grit, sorry. But yeah, now it's kind of worn down, probably closer to 800 or something like that, now pretty worn. And so you can see, like for this part, for the foot, it looks okay just at a glance, thinking, oh well, it doesn't really need too much on there, but it's when we really look up closely that you can see that little bit of nub there where it's removed, and like, yeah, it looks fine, but it's not quite perfect. If you can see it now, you're gonna be able to see it when there's paint on it too, so you need to get rid of that. And I wanted to also talk about mold lines on here. Now, it's fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know, unfortunately for me, because I wanted to illustrate this to you guys about mold lines. On the darker color pieces, which are easier to see, they don't really have much in the way of mold lines. Like you can see a little bit right there. You can just sand that just to get rid of that little mold line on there. Now, I don't think that, actually, I think this is like part of the torso that won't actually even show anyway, so it probably doesn't matter, but just for the sake of showing you guys, just want to make sure you get rid of those lines. Now also, on a lot of parts too, you'll have like the hard edge on like the the mold line is actually like along the actual edge of the part, so this edge at the top of this part is actually like really sharp. And I think it's usually better if you get rid of that, because why it's sharp is because there's a very slight like lip to the plastic there, so if you like run your finger over it, you can feel that there's like that kind of sharpness to this edge. And again, I think it just looks better when you just remove that ahead of time, because then once that's painted, it's just going to not look as nice. But again, with this particular part, this is like going to be up inside the torso and it's not going to show at all. I'll still sand that anyway. But mold lines through your middle of the part is where it's going to be a problem still. I know it's going to be hard to see because this is a white part, but it's the best example that we have with this kit. There's this line going around this whole side of this thigh armor piece. So if you guys can see that, again, if you can see it now while the kit is unpainted, you're going to be able to see it when the kit is painted. So although it's hard to see because the part is white, you're still going to have to do your best to get rid of that line. So again, it's just a matter of sanding to get rid of that mold line going around this part there. Alright, so this one is all sanded now. I know, yeah, it's still going to be hard to see, but hopefully you guys can see the difference between sanded and unsanded here, where you can still see that line a little bit on there. Now, the other question that I'll have people ask me sometimes is about the sanding process, is how much of the kit do you really need to sand? And the question is really it's really kind of up to you. You don't necessarily need to sand anything, but the more you sand, the better your result is going to be. So basically, any surface that's going to get paint, try to sand it, is usually my rule for how I'm sanding the kits. Now, I'm not worried about getting into like every single little nook and cranny, just all the major surfaces and like the top of the part here, the top of the part here. Make sure you get like these edges here, and just sand as much as you can. And again, you're just going to be getting a better result in the end. So I know it's tedious and boring and it takes a long time, especially for longer kits with a lot more parts and a lot larger parts, but it's just something that you just kind of have to be in the habit of doing.